Easy Explain on the Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche, third essay, sections 1 through 9. So the title of this third essay is, What is the Meaning of Ascetic Ideals? And ascetic, maybe not a word that everybody knows, but this is derived from the practice of asceticism, right? Being ascetic, the practice of asceticism. So this is essentially when you are voluntarily making sacrifices to just do with less in your life, to live with less, right? Picture like a very religious priest or monk, right? Have that in your mind as a visual. I think that just helps someone who is, foregoing some luxuries and pleasures of the world in the name of their faith and their practice of worship, right? So those are the ascetic ideals. Think of some religious leaders here. And Nietzsche's trying to get after these, right? He's like, why are these ideals and where do they come from? Why do we revere these people? So that's really the point, the purpose of this third and final essay in his genealogy. So let's get into it, starting with section 1. So Nietzsche says that the ascetic ideal has meant so many things to man, however, is an expression of the basic fact of the human will. Its horror of a vacuum. It needs a goal, and it will rather will nothingness than not will. And this is a big theme for Nietzsche. He's actually going to circle back to this at the end of the third essay as well. This goes back to the will to power, and it's a really existential point for Nietzsche that we're afraid of not acting, right? That's where the will to power comes from. We're afraid of not having power, of not willing and driving and forcing our lives, right? We are striving to overcome ourselves for Nietzsche. So he's saying this is a basic fact of human nature. We need to be striving and willing and driving towards something at all times. And we would rather will ourselves actively into nothingness than not will anything at all, right? We have to be driving, and we'd rather drive towards nothing intentionally than actually not will at all. So that's kind of what he's getting at here. Huge theme throughout this essay. We'll come back to it by the end, but he kicks off with it as well. Let's jump to section 3. We're going to look at a little bit about what Nietzsche says about being an artist and about being a philosopher. That's a big theme of this first part. So here he says, every artist arrives at the ultimate pinnacle of his greatness only when he comes to see himself and his art beneath him, when he knows how to laugh at himself. So, right, laughing at yourself is a sign of, maybe we could say enlightenment for Nietzsche. When you have overcome yourself, you've overcome your art. That's really when you've arrived, right? You've overcome yourself. So let's keep going with this theme of looking at an artist and their work. In section 4, he said, one does best to separate an artist from his work, not taking him as seriously as his work. He is, after all, only the precondition of his work, the womb, the soil, sometimes the dung and manure, on which, out of which, it grows. And therefore, in most cases, something one must forget, if one is to enjoy the work itself. Insight into the origin of a work concerns the physiologists and vivisectionists of the spirit, never the aesthetic man, the artist. Right, so this is, again, we're getting into a little bit of Nietzsche's aesthetics here, right? His philosophy of art and beauty and what it means to be an artist. Going to keep going because there's definitely some more topical big quotes to get to in this part of the essay, but I do think these are valuable and interesting as well. In section 4, another little bit, Nietzsche says, whoever is completely and wholly an artist is to all eternity separated from the real, the actual. It's a cool little quip. So now we're going to get back on track, though, right? What then is the meaning of ascetic ideals, kicking off in section 5? In the case of an artist, as we see, nothing whatever, or so many things that amounts to nothing whatever. So for Nietzsche here, right, if you're an artist, if you are overcoming yourself by creating art, by rising above that art, the ascetic ideals don't mean anything to you, right? You can look back at everything they've meant to humanity through time, through history, and you can disregard them, right? These are actually not an ideal to strive for to Nietzsche. Just like in Buddhism, the Buddha found enlightenment through practicing asceticism, and then when he, reached that state, he was like, never mind, don't, you need to take care of yourself, don't take it that far. It's the Buddhistic nature of Nietzsche's philosophy. Section 5 continued, starts to take this a step further now. He says, here we have arrived at the more serious question, what does it mean when a genuine philosopher pays homage to the ascetic ideal? Section 6, very similar theme. What does it mean when a philosopher pays homage to the ascetic ideal? Here we get, at any rate, a first indication. He wants to gain release from a torture. We're going to keep developing this here. And in section 7, Nietzsche actually gives you a little quote about what it means to be a genuine philosopher, a real philosopher, and what it means to reflect on these ascetic ideals in that case. So Nietzsche says, what then is the meaning of ascetic ideals, of the ascetic ideal in the case of a philosopher? My answer is, you have guessed it long ago, the philosopher sees in it an optimum condition for the highest and boldest spirituality and smiles. He does not deny existence, he rather affirms his existence, and only his existence. And this perhaps is the point at which he is not far from harboring the impious wish. Let the world perish, but let there be philosophy, the philosopher me. So, again, here we commonly see some issues with the interpretation of Nietzsche. A lot of people might think he's nihilistic, but here this is a great passage that really shows how life-affirming he is when you can confront those ascetic ideals and overcome them, rise above them, and really take ownership over your own experience, your own existence. So that's just a key quote there from section 7. Moving on to section 8, for we philosophers need to be spared one thing above all, everything to do with today. Get rid of what's trendy, hot, and current, and modernity, right? We revere what is still cold, noble, distant past, and in general everything in the face of which the soul does not have to defend itself and wrap itself up, what one can speak to without speaking aloud, right? Some of these more eternal truths is what Nietzsche's trying to get after. Moving on to section 9, it says all good things were formerly bad things. Every original sin has turned into an original virtue. I think that's just great hitting the nail on the head here in terms of what Nietzsche's critique here is and what his moral philosophy is. Critiquing religion and looking how we've gotten to this point of our moral codes and our moral systems and structures. And finally, to wrap up this first third of the third essay, Nietzsche says every small step on earth has been paid for by spiritual and physical torture. This whole point of view that not only every progressive step, no, every step, movement, and change has required its countless martyrs, sounds utterly strange to us today. So he's calling this out, and he's saying this is true. Look at it. Look at this picture I'm painting. Look at our history. We've torn down temples to build new ones, right? There has been great sacrifice, great punishment, great guilt, great torture to get to where we are today. And he's saying this might sound strange, but just because it sounds strange doesn't mean it's not true. So again, this is the first third that we're going to cover of this third and final essay in the genealogy. So for this first part, for now, I hope it helps.